Okay, and
Yes.
bigger. Yeah. Okay. All right. Very good. Okay. All right. So we've covered a lot of ground. Why voting matters. I mean, I think everyone across the country knows we have a monster election coming up. Some of the myths around voting by mail. Long story short, it's a safe, secure way for anyone to vote, regardless of their party affiliation. And then we were talking about the mechanics, which include, once you get your request in timely, you'll get this packet of materials: the ballot, the instructions, the secrecy envelope, and the return envelope. And if there are any ballot questions, which in the city of Philadelphia there will be some number of ballot questions that folks will see, there will be those questions and the summaries of these questions that also included in this ballot packet. So I'll pause there. I'm not sure if any questions have come in through the chat, or if anyone on the Zoom meeting here would like to toss one in. But I just want to pause just for a quick moment to see if there are questions about those items. I'm going to try to open up the chat feature again myself so I can see.
We had a question that came in a day or two ago about fake ballots coming in the mail. Like, if you requested one, how to know that it's the real ballot.
That's an interesting question. I have not heard that one yet.
Mhm.
I think probably the best way to respond to that, I guess, would be like, there are going to be images and videos of this process all over the place. I mean, we're still kind of early here in actually the voter education and outreach that'll happen in the lead up to November. There's going to be, I know there are a lot of resources and a lot of groups that are going to be putting out images and videos so that people will be able to see exactly what the ballot envelope looks like. And if with a screen that's shared right now, you can see on the left hand side that envelope with a barcode looking thing on the right hand side. It says business reply mail, official election mail. I mean, that's what the ballot pack, which has all this stuff, that's what the ballot envelope looks like. The return envelope also looks kind of similar to that. I mean, if someone receives something that looks not quite like that, or for whatever reason someone receives something just seems off, they should definitely call the office of the city commissioners right away, or the committee of 70. I got to say, I haven't heard of that problem before anywhere in Pennsylvania or any other state. But it's a good question. I think to the extent that someone would try to disrupt the election in some way, that would be a pretty serious and grave way to get
Right.
to
I
disrupt
think
things,
there was also
and would risk. Yeah. I mean, I was going to say, I mean, someone who was going to perpetrate that sort of scheme would be going to jail. And a lot of resources would be brought to bear by the city, state, and then federal governments to track down whoever did that. So I think it's highly unlikely that sort of scheme would be hatched. But same thing with anything else about this process. If you have any questions whatsoever, the office of the city commissioners and the PhiladelphiaVotes.com website is the city's election website. The committee of 70, we also are available to answer folks' questions too. And if you have a question asked, that's always like the best default.
And would a ballot wouldn't ask you for your social security number or?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the ballot itself won't be asking for any sort of identifiable information like that, because the ballot return envelope already have your information. It'll have your name and your address, and you're going to have to sign your name and your address on the return envelope anyway as part of the declaration form. On the absentee and mail-in ballot request form, for example, however, whether it's the online application that you use at votespa.com or the paper application, you can download a PDF of the mail-in request form and fill it in. That does ask for certain identifiable information, and actually, with regard to concerns about voter fraud, one of the security measures that's in place for the absentee and mail-in ballot process is voter ID. The only aspect of the 2012 Pennsylvania voter ID law that was not blocked by the judge applied to absentee ballots. The portion that applied to in-person voting was blocked permanently, and that's why when you go to vote in person at a polling place, the only time you have to show some form of identification is when you're going to your precinct, where you're going to your polling place for the very first time. It's when you've moved, or you've just turned 18, or you're a naturalized citizen. When you go to your precinct, you do have to show an approved form of photo or non-photo ID, but there's a long list of things. It can be a driver's license or a student ID or a utility bill. That's the only ID requirement that still exists for in-person voting. Again, only for first-time in-person voters. When you apply to vote by absentee or mail-in, it's going to ask for either your PIN.ID number if you have that. If you don't have a PIN.ID, you can include the last 4 digits of your social security number. And if you're an applicant for a mail-in or absentee ballot and you don't have a PIN.ID, or you don't have or don't know the last 4 digits of your social security number, if you don't have either of those things, you do have to provide a form of ID with that application. That should be a pretty small number of people who don't have either of those things. And again, I think that's another situation where if someone's running into issues with that, they should call the city commissioner's office or the committee 70, and we'll help get it sorted. But that was actually one of the complications for the June primary. For folks who are joining us today who did apply to vote by mail or try to apply to vote by mail, the online application system that the Department of State constructed for the primary, you could only use if you had a PIN. And they've had to, there were a number of technical challenges in finishing that application. But now when you apply online, you can insert either your PIN.ID or the last 4 digits of your social security number, which again, most eligible voters should have one or both of those things. All right. So those are the mechanics of voting by absentee, voting by mail. I think the last thing I'd kind of reiterate here is that it's a relatively easy way to vote. It relieves the stress of having to get to a polling place on a single day and stand in line and then having limited amount of time in the voting booth. The trick is you have to apply early, and you do have to be mindful of the deadlines. The deadlines are really, really critical. Again, it's the Tuesday before election day at 5 o'clock is when the applications or the requests are due. By 5 o'clock, postmarks do not matter. And then the ballots themselves have to be back by 8 o'clock on election day. One of our biggest concerns for the fall is thousands of voters not getting their applications or not getting their ballots returned by those deadlines. Just with the June 2nd primary, again, kind of unusual conditions because the pandemic was still exploding. The protests were spreading across the city of Philadelphia, and the drop-off locations were set up pretty late in the timeline. The governor issued an executive order the day before the primary, the day before the June 2nd primary, for voters in 6 Pennsylvania counties, including Philadelphia, to, if they got their ballots in the mail by June 2nd on election day, they could be received after that, which is not the law. There was as a very special order and condition only for the primary. But there were at least 9,000 ballots in the city of Philadelphia that were counted only because of that executive order. So I just mentioned that to note that would have been 9,000 people who would have been disenfranchised and whose ballots would not have been counted if not for the governor's executive order. We should not count on an executive order or some other last minute occurrence to change the deadline for November. People have to expect that deadline is going to be rock solid, and the General Assembly probably is not likely to change it in the next several weeks. So the deadlines are critical. So that's the mail-in voting process. Now, just a little bit about figuring out who to vote for. There are a bunch of tools out there. One of them that 70 is pulling together is called the BYO ballot. Bring your own ballot. This is a very easy tool where if you plug in your address, where you live, because the ballots will be geography specific. There are both state and federal level district races that'll change depending on where you live and where you're registered to vote. So with this tool, you can plug in your address. It'll bring up the offices and the candidates for where you live, and you can peruse those. And there's basic candidate information in there. We distribute a simple questionnaire. And you can use that as one of hopefully a number of different resources to help with kind of evaluate who you're going to cast ballots for. So ballot.70.org is one of a number of kind of voter guides that'll be out there for people to use. But again, another reason to vote by mail is that you would have lots of time to use this BYOB ballot tool, to use whatever our local media produce, our local media outlets, many of them produce voter guides. There will be a lot of information out there about the offices, the candidates, and the ballot questions. If you're voting by mail, you will have more time to go through those resources. So there's a lot on the ballot. Again, we all know what's at the very top, and this is that's what has been consuming all of our time and attention 24/7 is the office of the presidency. But there is a good deal more. There other state and federal offices on the ballot, and then, like I mentioned previously, there are some number of ballot questions that we'll have in the city of Philadelphia in particular. And so, for a quick rundown of what will be on the ballot, again, at the very top will be the office of the presidency. We know that Donald Trump, the Republican incumbent, will be one of the candidates. Joe Biden will be the Democratic candidate for the other major party, and there will likely be some number of third party or independent candidates, both for office of the presidency and the other offices. That paperwork to get on the ballot as a third party or independent candidate is actually due next week. There are different deadlines and different procedures to follow state by state for independent or third party candidates to get on the ballot. But again, as far as the presidency goes, we know who the two major party candidates are, and there will be a tremendous amount of advertising coming in, both again through TV and through social media, and just anywhere else on the internet from now through November 3rd. So just let's just brace ourselves for that. The other federal office that'll be on the ballot is our U.S. reps. We have 18 U.S. House districts that cover the state of Pennsylvania. 3 districts that cover the city of Philadelphia, and all 18 of these districts, all three of the seats in Philadelphia will be on the ballot. Obviously, like the U.S. Congress and this chamber of the U.S. Congress, the U.S. House, has a great deal of power in setting national policy. So this is kind of an obvious for why this is important. This also reminded me. Let me go, if I can, just back to the presidency real quick. One of the unique factors around the presidential election is that we have a popular vote and the electoral college vote, right? And it's the electoral college vote that actually determines who will enter the White House. So there's another thing that there's it may come up in our social studies classes, but we kind of forget the details as we get older. Even if we vote for this office every 4 years, Pennsylvania is tremendously valuable and important when it comes to presidential elections because of our electoral college votes. We have 20 of them, and this is set by the number of U.S. Representatives, the number of U.S. districts that we have, which is 18, and then the number of U.S. senators that we have, which is 2. So 18 plus 2 is 20. And our 20 electoral college votes matter because Pennsylvania is a relatively large state. We're not as big as California or Texas or New York, but we are fairly large, and we can swing. We're a quote unquote swing state where we can go one way or the other. And whoever wins the most popular votes in Pennsylvania, that dictates who gets all 20 of our electoral college votes. So they're not allocated proportionally based on the election result. If one candidate gets, let's say, 2/3 of the votes, that candidate will then get 2/3 of the electoral college votes. Whichever candidate wins Pennsylvania, just on the straight popular vote, the number of individual ballots cast by voters, that candidate gets all 20 electoral college votes, which is why, again, we're a swing state. There's going to be, of all the attention and the advertising dollars and the scrutiny, the incredibly scrutiny that we'll have on our state over the next several months, it's because of that electoral college dynamic. So again, 18 U.S. House districts across the state, 3 of them in Philly. We'll see those on the ballot. Again, you will only see one U.S. district office on your ballot because you only have one U.S. rep wherever you live. There will also be 3 quote unquote row offices on the ballot. These are state row offices, each of them quite powerful and quite significant. One of them is the Pennsylvania Attorney General, who is essentially the chief law enforcement officer, the top cop in the state. This individual, obviously can prosecute, criminal crimes and has a fairly large staff, and also not only enforces state law and takes criminal cases to court, but also has a fair degree of policy discretion as well. Are they going to focus on gun violence or drugs or some other facet of criminal behavior in the state? So it's a very powerful office right now. The incumbent's in Democrat, but this office can go back and forth depending on the statewide vote. And it's one that many people are paying close attention to for November. The next state level office is the Auditor General, which is kind of like, I mean, with the text we have here is the chief fiscal watchdog, but it's kind of like our chief controller or our chief auditor, responsible for conducting audits, making sure that whatever the performance goals and objectives are for our department, our state department, that they're meeting those goals and that money is being spent effectively and efficiently, and that money's not being wasted. So again, kind of like an auditor function, but also with a fair degree, similar to the Attorney General, some fair degree of policy discretion as to what they focus on. In this case, auditors are focused on charter schools or our healthcare system or infrastructure spending. It can be a number of different things based on the policy and the political preferences of whoever holds that office. And then lastly is the Pennsylvania Treasurer. And to the title of this office, this is the person who holds the treasure, who holds our money. There is a tremendous amount of dollars, $100+ billion, in fact, of state funding that we have at an even given point in time. This money is not just sitting underneath, the state's, mattress. This money is invested to earn what should be like a safe and steady return over time. So it's invested in, almost in a similar way to where individual investors like have stocks and bonds and a diverse portfolio to ensure a steady and safe return over a period of time. That's really the treasurer's top role, is to make sure the state's funds are also invested in a way that's safe and that gets us a decent return, but also make sure this is a stable return and that our money is sound, especially when we go through economic fluctuations or economic recessions or depressions, which we're also obviously like kind of in the middle of right now. So those are the three state offices. The other state offices on the ballot are for our legislature. We have a 253 member legislature in Pennsylvania. We have 50 seats in the state Senate. Only the odd numbered districts are on the ballot this year. Our state senators serve staggered 4-year terms. So the odd numbered folks are up this year. The even numbered folks will be back up in 2022. And in the city of Philadelphia, it's only the odd numbered districts that are up. We start towards we're at the very beginning of the numeric order, districts 1, 3, 5, and 7. That folks will see on the ballot. So actually, if you're registered in the city of Philadelphia, you may or may not see a state Senate office on your ballot, depending on whether or not you're in an even or odd district. And that's something that can sometimes confuse people. If you think that state Senate should be on the ballot, you're looking for it and you don't see it, that's going to be because you live in an even number district, not because there's something wrong with your ballot. And then lastly, of course, our legislature in Pennsylvania is bicameral. There are 2 chambers, and the Pennsylvania House is the other one. There are 203 members here and some 25, 26 districts that cover the city of Philadelphia. You'll have a chance to vote for one person to represent your state district 2. So that's the full lineup from top to bottom that you'll see on your ballot. The only other pieces that we don't have now, because they're not officially set yet, are the ballot questions. There will be some number of ballot questions just within the city of Philadelphia. A couple of them will be, or at least one of them will be police reform related work that city council got done very, very quickly before the summer. But again, you'll have, when you get your ballot, you'll have a chance to look at those questions, look at the summaries, and try to do some more research online if you wish before you vote yes or no. All these ballot questions, whether or not they're local ballot questions or statewide, state level ballot questions with regard to our Constitution, they're all determined by a simple majority. Just 50% plus 1 determines whether or not a ballot question gets passed or not, since it's a simple yes/no vote. So I'll pause again here. If there are any questions, like that's all, I think most all the ground that we want to cover today. These unique conditions we're voting under with the pandemic, this new vote by mail thing, and a little bit about how you do that. And some of the risks and concerns that get raised frequently, and then kind of a rundown on the ballot. So pause again for a second. Any other questions that folks have at this point? I know we've covered a lot.
There is a question in the chat about the mail-in ballots. What can we do to encourage voting by mail with others? Not sure we lost it, but.
Yeah. What can we do to encourage vote by mail with others? So, not surprisingly, like all the research that's available, not just on voting, but on almost any human behavior, is that the most powerful nudges to get someone to do a certain thing come from someone with whom there's a relationship, and with when there's a personal message. And this is something that actually campaigns try to take advantage of themselves. Some of the research that's been found is like when you send, for example, a postcard to a voter trying to encourage them to vote before election day. If that postcard has looked up, not just the voters, the recipient's voter record, but some of their neighbors' voters' voting records, or the most sophisticated way of doing this is like when you can use social media and digital connections to figure out who someone is probably associated with and share their voting records. Like that greatly increases the likelihood that someone will cast a ballot because they think that everybody else is doing it. So that's one of the things that sophisticated campaigns can do to nudge people to vote. Obviously, like none of us, individually or collectively, are part of like a campaign with those sorts of resources and tactics. But one of the things that you can do is make a deliberate effort to reach out through your network, and urge them to vote this way, and provide. It doesn't have to be a great deal of detailed information, but a fairly brief note that links to what are the most important websites for people to use. This is going to be the city's website is philadelphiavotes.com, the state's website is votespa.com. Just those two websites, and flagging the date that the applications are due, when the ballots are due, and saying, hey, this is the safest way to vote, it's a reliable way to vote, I'm going to do this, you should do this too. That can be a very short email or a Facebook post. Putting that out to your friends, your family, your work colleagues is powerful, and that's something that I've actually taken to doing. Not because I realized on my own that was something worth doing, but actually because I saw other people doing it, where they had, before every election, they would put together an email list, just their own personal network, and they put out a pre-election email with basic information. And my emails are strictly nonpartisan because of my day job. But if you want to keep your email nonpartisan, or if you want to offer like suggestions on the candidates, like that's fine too. And I think that would have a tremendous effect on increasing the number of people who vote this way. If whether it's 20 people or 50 people or 100 people or plus, you really can, as an individual, produce votes that otherwise would not have come in. The research also shows that for campaigns that are trying to do this with resources, it takes $30 to turn someone out to the polls, or to get someone to vote who otherwise would not be able to. That's $30 of funding and staff time, volunteer work, door-to-door knocking, or phone calls. I mean, that's the amount of resources it takes from the campaign side. So one of the things to think about is like, I mean, you can, if you want to support a given campaign, of course, you can always give money. But if you take this kind of action to reach out and nudge people through your network, and you produce an extra 10 votes or 20 votes that otherwise would not have gotten out there, that's 10 votes times 30. That's $300 worth of voting behavior that you've just produced through your own network. So I think that's what I'd stress there, is like, do not underestimate your own power to nudge people in your network to do this. Yeah. Anything else? I know we've covered a whole lot, and there will probably questions coming in when we're done. Of course, we can find another way for those questions, for if they come in, for us to answer them separately. Oh.
Yeah, we got some more questions in the chat. Do you want to talk about some of them, or do you want to wait till the end?
No, right now would be fine.
Cool. There's one question about where to go to get the voter registration form, or does it get mailed to you? I can put a link in the chat. It won't get mailed to you automatically, so you have to go register for it, but I can put a link in the chat to where you can go to apply to register to vote. And if you wanted to get a mail-in ballot sent to you, I can put that in the chat. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, registration forms, at least they will not be sent by the city or the state. Actually, something I didn't stress before that I should now. If you have access to a computer with internet, or if you're able to do this through your phone, excuse me, it is really best that if you need to register to vote, or if you need to update your registration, that you do that online. If you're requesting an absentee or mail-in ballot, that you do that online as well. The reason that is by far the best option is because on the paper and it cuts down on the opportunities for mistakes. On the applicant side, whether you're registering to vote or you're registering to, or you're applying to vote by mail, if there's a legibility issue with your application, like that can cause a problem. If you forget to fill in a field, or if you forget to sign the registration form, the application, like that can be a problem. And then on the county side, like when the counties get a piece of paper, a paper voter registration application or a paper mail request form, there's a clerk who has to sit down at a computer and type in the information from that request. And when these clerks get thousands and thousands of forms, like that's another opportunity for like a typo to come up. So I would urge people, again, it's votespa.com has both the registration form and the mail-in request form. Votespa.com is like the number one place to go for these voting procedures. So that's why I encourage people to go first. There will also be I think registration forms probably being sent by third parties as well. This is something that always happens in these presidential election years. Do not be surprised if you get a voter registration form in the mail by some nonprofit. Don't be surprised if you get a mail-in application by some third-party entity in the mail. Also along the way, I think if you get those, that's okay. I would encourage you to apply online if you can. And what you definitely should not do is, like, if you've already successfully registered, or if you've already successfully applied, don't send in multiple applications just because you keep getting them in the mail from third parties. That's another way where like the processes kind of get jammed up, and if you end up with 3 different applications, like it can cause confusion on the county side. So that's an unfortunate thing we have in these presidential election years, when like we have a lot of groups swooping in. And because, again, we were talking about how Pennsylvania is a big state in presidential election years, like there's a lot of money pouring into the Commonwealth to send people applications. So if you can apply online, great. If you do need to send a paper application back to your county, that's okay too. Just not as preferable.
Cool. And we have a question about what are some of the local ward districts doing to make this voting by mail a success, especially in terms of meeting the deadline?
Mm-hmm.
And then also, how are those who helped at the polls, how are they being useful in the vote by mail process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are a number of kind of arenas in which like changes are still underway for November. And one of them is the General Assembly. There is discussion and negotiation happening right now around one final set of refinements to the state election code. This is our state election law that sets how we do things. A lot of the Voting Rights Act, advocates, including the Committee 70, like we want to see the deadlines change, and for postmark ballots on election day to be received up to 7 days after the election. There probably will be a very, very limited set of changes there. But that's one area of that we're still waiting to see how that plays out. There's also litigation. There's active litigation underway right now. Multiple lawsuits around drop boxes and around poll watchers, like that has to play out through the fall. And then thirdly, and probably most important, at the county level, and in Philadelphia, we have our Office of the City Commissioners that oversees our city and county level election administration and voter registration. There is planning and implementation that's happening within those offices to get ready for November. So that's where the most urgent strategy setting and the planning and the implementation, the execution needs to happen to have the smoothest possible November 3rd election. So the wards we have in Philadelphia, those the partisan wards, they're kind of tangentially involved in that they'll certainly have a role in getting out information about how to vote by mail and information about polling places. A number of the ward leaders are also very important in finding poll workers to fill in on election day. But it's the Office of City Commissioners where they're like the real heavy duty planning has to happen and is happening to make sure the vote by mail process is a success. One of the things they're having to do is basically turn themselves overnight into a mail house, where in a prior presidential election year they would have had 20,000 absentee ballots to deal with. In the June 2nd primary, they had 175,000 total absentee and mail-in ballots, and that number is only expected to double for the November election. 350,000 plus absentee and mail ballots. So they're scrambling right now to get the equipment and the staffing and the space to handle that volume. And that's really where, as far as Philadelphians go, whether or not the vote by mail process will be a success. I'm confident that they're working on this very hard right now, and they're gonna pull this off. But that's where a lot of that work is happening. The only other thing I'll note is like outside of that, we are going to need people to serve as poll workers. We are going to need everybody, individual voters, civic and community groups, our public officials, businesses to be using every communication channel available to get out the word about vote by mail and to get out the word about polling places and drop-off locations once those are finalized, just like we're doing this afternoon. So that's kind of like the framework of where the planning is happening right now.
Thank you.
All right. Looks like, might that be the questions for this afternoon?
I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. Anybody else have a question? I'll check on our Facebook chat quickly.
Okay. Well, while you're doing that, I'll flag a couple opportunities for folks to. And I mean, the first one is, there was a great question earlier about, how can we help get more people to learn about vote by mail and vote that way. Number one thing is like take deliberate steps and action through your own network to communicate this stuff. Again, it doesn't have to be a very detailed communication, just flagging the city and the state's election websites, the critical deadlines, and how important this is. Like would be more than enough to share with your personal networks. In addition to that, two of the other ways to directly get involved in the election. One will be to serve as a poll worker. We are trying to have, I know the city commissioners are working very, very hard to try to open up as many of our polling sites as we possibly can for the November 3rd election day. The June 2nd primary, the massive consolidation we had, we went from the 820, 830 physical polling places that we usually have in Philadelphia down to 190 for June 2nd, which caused inevitably a lot of confusion, a lot of frustration, and some anger. We will almost assuredly not have that sort of consolidation for November, in part because that sort of consolidation was only made possible because of emergency legislation passed in the General Assembly in March, and it does not look like anything like that emergency legislation will be passed around polling place consolidation for the fall. So we're going to be looking to open 650, 700 physical polling places at least. And this means that we will need thousands of people to serve as poll workers. Hopefully that the county will have the flexibility it needs from the state to appoint and assign poll workers anywhere within a given county. Usually poll workers have to be from the precinct in which they're working, which is a pretty big restriction. But hopefully that flexibility will be granted, and anyone within the city of Philadelphia will be able to serve as a poll worker within the city of Philadelphia. But that will have to go through the city commissioner's office. So the votespa.com website, again, is the state's main website. And there's a form there to fill out if you might want to be a poll worker. PhiladelphiaVotes.com, the city's website as well, has a form to fill out if you might want to be a poll worker. And if that's something you might be, or if that's definitely something you'd be interested in doing, I'm sorry for that background noise. I would definitely consider that. So we got the phone in the background there. And were there any questions from the Facebook page?
Nope. Yep, I think that we covered most of our questions. That was really helpful to go through a lot of this stuff. So, and I'm not seeing any others come up in our chat. Cool.
All righty, thank you. A couple of different technical issues that happen sometimes. At least we weren't in Zoom bomb, like that happens too. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, please feel free to share my contact information. It's also on the Media 70 website, and we're going to have a lot of questions here. I hope more opportunities to talk about these procedures because a lot of things are still in flux. As far as the November election goes, again, the General Assembly will almost surely change at least a couple parts of election law the litigation that's ongoing will probably also change a few things, and then the counties themselves have to firm up their plans for how things will work. That includes, where drop off options will be around ballots, for example. So there are a lot of things still that are kind of uncertain, and there's going to be more to talk about. So I'm so glad we could start this discussion kind of earlier in the summer.
Awesome. And I will share your contact information with the people who attended today in case there's additional questions that they want to reach out to you with.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me. And
Yep,
have a nice day, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for attending.